Please take your seats. We're going to have our next speaker. We're very fortunate to have with us Craig Preston. Craig is the California coordinator for the Conservative Caucus, and he was also the co-founder of the first CCL chapter in Orange County in 2013. Prior to 2013, Craig was a leader with the MoveOn.org, California Clean Money Campaign, and Toastmasters. He's a very accomplished speaker. He has a terrific presentation in store here. So please join me in welcoming Craig.
Thank you, Meredith. Good morning. Thank you for being here, and I have a few questions for you to start off with. First, if you were here in the last session, Dr. Hansen spoke about the medical issues regarding climate change. Very powerful talk. I'm sure that the breakout, whatever ones you've chosen over the thing, have all had a powerful twist to them. And obviously in CCL, we want to address this in a realistic way and work on solutions and mitigating and trying to lower the risk. Dr. Hansen, thank you for that talk. It was very touching. And a few times he was overcome with some emotion, which I might be too. We'll see how it goes here. But a few questions are, first, how many of you are on, CCL has a website and it has a community site where we can all get more connected to each other. How many of you are on community? Most of you, fantastic. If you're not, I encourage you to join that. And then there's action teams. I counted last week, there's 38 that I found so far. How many are you on an action team on community? Fantastic. And then now sometimes chapters, they've been doing those action teams within the chapter to have political levers of will, a media team, things like that. How many of you are on a local chapter's action team? Fantastic. Lobbying, media, grassroots. Well, today what I'm talking about is the Conservative Caucus. We're one of those action teams at the national level, and I'll talk to you about how you can locally get more involved. Yesterday, it was mentioned about the book Drawdown. How many are familiar with the book Drawdown? We've had him on our national speaker that spoke about it. We sold out over here yesterday of that book. The book, in summary, talks about the different solutions to climate change, but they rate them. How much millions of tons of CO2 would that solution fix? And CCL's not in there because we're not really set up to be a solution. We're set up to be a policy that would fuel all those solutions. So I loved that when the speaker came on our call and that was asked, what about CF&D? It's like, we are the fuel of that. We are the impetus for all of those solutions to have an easier chance of being implemented. So I just want to point that out, that how we are so important in that way, and they see that. So where I'm going to turn is that within CCL, we have different passions, and some of you might even politically lean more liberal, some more conservative, some moderates. At the CCL conference, I was touched by, there were some of our speakers that said, we are radically moderate. And then somebody said they were violently nonpartisan. I was like, yes, we need some passion in the middle. So I'm drawing you into the middle now, where you might get a little uncomfortable, because I'm a Republican. And so you're in the room with a Republican. Stay calm, stay calm. And there might be one sitting next to you. Just beware. I might introduce them later on. So, all right. So to Mark Reynolds, he has the reins of our organization, but he delegates. And we now have we asked in the Conservative Caucus for a paid staff member, Jim Tolbert, and Mark Reynolds said, Jim, we need more Conservative Caucus members, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I'm encouraged that in the DC conference in June, there's going to be hopefully more conservatives. And so how many of you have been to the DC conference in June or November? Fantastic. I used to go once a year, and now I'm going twice a year. Maybe we'll have a third time a year, but it's the only reason I'm flying right now is to go to DC and lobby Congress, and hoping that we will push them further and further. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. But again, I'm Craig Preston. I'm the California coordinator. I used to be the Southern California coordinator, and then Kathy Orlinsky came on board and Todd Elvins, and they took over that role so I could focus more on the Conservative Caucus. And so that's the role I'm in now. Today's talk is a practical discussion on conservative outreach and recruiting. This will be a little different than what you've heard before, because sometimes we talk about messaging, of how do we talk to conservatives or help them come in. I'm glad we have those talks, and they're on the website. Today we're going to talk more about how to find them. So here's a brief agenda. We're going to talk about the definition of the Conservative Caucus, so you have more clarity on that. The pronounced need for more pro-climate Republicans in Congress and in CCL. Where do we look for them when we're trying to look for our keys? Tools to reach them. And then we'll have a special video by Mia Love. And then I'm going to have some people come up here and show you what they've done with this. And then we'll have a Q&A. Okay, so the way we define the Conservative Caucus is people that are right of center. If you think about where you are you left of center or right of center or right in the middle? Most of us aren't right in the middle. We lean one way or another, and that's our prerogative, and we need both sides. That's how we have a strong democracy, is both sides bring good solutions to the table. But we want those right of center people to come into CCL and help us, and so the Conservative Caucus is a group of people that lean that way, that want to work on climate action and CF&D. So they tend to be Republicans, Libertarians, or independents that lean right, fiscally conservative types. So that's who are in the Conservative Caucus. Here in California, I run a call, and I also invite friends of the caucus. So if you think, oh, I'm not going to be one of those Conservative Caucus members, but you might be a friend of the caucus. So hang on there. In terms of just reality, this is what we're dealing with in Congress right now. You see a lot of red on that. That's where the power structure is right now. Out of 435 seats in Congress, 239 are Republican, 51 senators. And so that, I'm sure a lot of you are working to change that. Blue, red, it changes over time. And so we may have a flipping of the House. And so that all can help in some ways. Right now the Democrats seem to be more open to our solution. But we want a strong solution. And so we don't want a bill that's just a Democratic bill. We want one that's bipartisan. And so we're going to keep working on these red sides. And that's why I'm so excited about the Climate Solutions Caucus. And so I always bring that graphic out. I've had that on the table over there, and I had 4 or 5 copies of it, and they've disappeared. I think other people like it too. They've taken my copy. But I found another one. But I love showing this off. Here's our status so far. This was back when it was 52 members. And I want us all to think that we're going to keep the graphic department of CCL very frustrated because they can't keep up. Now it's up to 70. So I want to keep this graphic growing, both on the right and the left. So I'm going to use an illustration of just a key. If we had our keys in our hand and we lost our keys, we'd want to find them quickly. And so the key here is we're trying to find some Republicans to build here in CCL. We've done a survey in CCL recently of where are we. Let's just start, and 88% lean to the left in CCL, tend to. 5% other and 7% on the right. And so we're trying to grow that so that we can be more similar to the U.S. population, which tends to be 36% conservative, 25% liberal. So those red marks is where we're trying to get that growing up here. There's an old story from about over 100 years ago of a drunk man bobbling down the street. Police officer comes along and says, "How can I help you?" He's looking for his keys. Back then he was looking for a $2 bill, I think. But he's looking, he's struggling. He's on this left side, say, over there under the light. And the police officer says, "Well, is this where you lost your keys?" "Well, no, I lost them over there, but the light's better over here." We want to be focusing sometimes where it's a harder place to go, but that might be where the key is. And so here's a survey that was done by the Six Americas type of concept. Who's aware of the Six Americas and Dr. Leisowitz? The Yale study, and they do a podcast, marvelous work on communicating these issues. But he asked people a question in March of 2016. Who are you going to vote for if you had to vote today, Trump or Hillary? And where do you stand on climate? And so this graph came out showing that there are Republicans that were going to vote for Trump on that side. You'll see the red on the left side there. CCL recruits. That on the right side are people that are undecided and we call them dismissive or doubtful. And that's a harder group to approach. They're pretty entrenched, and we want to move them, but they're a harder group to approach. But here, over on the other side, in those red bars, 11% of the alarmed and 14% of the concerned we're going to vote for Trump, and they're in that category. They match us in that way of being concerned and wanting action. If we do the math of 1.9% and 3.9% of those voters represented there, out of 240 million voters in America, that would mean 14 million of them are out there. So if you're wondering, are they really out there, pro-climate conservatives? There's 14 million of them out there, but how are we going to find them? So where are these alarmed conservatives, and where can I go talk to them? This graphic is such a mishmash of people, but they're out there. And so we have a conservative Republican toolkit that's available on the website, but I'm going to briefly just show you things that we've done here to apply it. Where we've had success already as we grow the conservative caucus here in California is going to the California GOP convention, going to the Republican Women Federated clubs and California Republican Assembly clubs, and lately the Santa Clara County Republican Party Central Committee meeting. That there's a group up in Silicon Valley North, and they've decided to start going to their monthly meeting for the Santa Clara County Republican Party and make friends. Be friendly and find some pro-climate Republicans. Where we're continuing to branch out is a group called Young Americans for Liberty. They're a libertarian group that is on 900 college campuses. They're growing quickly, and college campuses kids tend to be libertarian. There's a strong group of what they end up being, and they like our policy. We've met with them nationally, but now they're inviting us to their local regional conferences to table and present carbon fee and dividend, because it's a market business phrase approach. It's freedom for the market as opposed to regulation. So we're finding these libertarian groups are endorsing us and wanting us to come to their conferences. So that will be in San Francisco in a few months. But young Republicans, college Republicans, and I'm personally making it my goal to go to the Republican Party of Orange County. When I go to the Central Committee meeting, I'm also trying to make friends and build our process there. All right, quickly. So on the left is a Bob Inglis flyer, and on the right is I walk in with this. And so I find as a conversation starter, just sharing, I'm here to talk about this. And they look at it and they see some people, they immediately their eyes tend to go to the red side and they look for their friends. And they go, really? Darrell Issa is on there? And Ed Royce and Mimi Walters? Yes. They're coming out and they're taking a bold stand to be on the Climate Solutions Caucus. And immediately that gets a great conversation going. And then the other one is a flyer that's available on our website where Bob Inglis spoke in Houston a year and a half ago. And on the bottom are all these logos of Republican clubs and the Citizens Climate Lobby Conservative Caucus. So immediately I'm looked at as friend, not foe. Makes a great conversation starter. So these are available, but we recommend you may not be the one to do this. You may want it, but you may know somebody in your chapter that would want to do this and start this off and go and start these conversations. And we want to branch out though, and where are these conservatives? Some of them are in conservative clubs that actually have the name Republican maybe, but also we found success in the Audubon Society, Ducks Unlimited, Newport Beach Yacht Club is one of our targets, ski clubs, Trout Unlimited. That Trout Unlimited at their national conference has a breakout on climate. And then Rotary clubs and Caucus. Who recognizes this man? Marshall Saunders, our founder, is a longtime Rotarian, and in the 90s, he worked with Rotary to raise $700,000 on microfinance institutions in Mexico. He spoke at their international conference 5 times. Great intro into the Rotary. That a lot of our principles and his heart flowing through us makes it so that we align very well with Rotary in some ways. Kiwanis clubs also are another philanthropic social group that do things for the community. So I'm finding that to be a good place to find people that are moderate, right, and left of center. All right, ways that you might use these ideas. In your chapter, you could build local teams that would focus on right of center audiences. You could have targeted events, and I'll show you one in a moment that was very successful. You could have a conservative talk scheduler that Edric and Jeffrey, can you raise your hand? There's Jeffrey and Edric. Edric is group leader for Long Beach, and he had a new member show up and say, how can I help? And Edric said, how about you become a scheduler and schedule us for more presentations? And he said, well, who do I reach out to? Well, you could go for the low-hanging fruit maybe on the left, But no, he went for the right. And he reached out and found a lot of speaking organizations that wanted us to come. Some of those that I mentioned, California Republican Assembly, the women's clubs that are Republican. Then there was a snag saying, well, some of their bylaws say they have to have a Republican speaker. So he contacted me, and I and others that are Republican could go speak in those venues. So there's partnerships there that have been very successful in Long Beach, and we want to expand that we're a resource to you as you come across these groups that we'll be willing to have a speaker come. We can provide you those speakers. You'll see a few of them up here. And the last one is invitation lists. We're preparing for a bill to drop. And how many of you have been working on that to prepare for a bill that would drop in Congress that would be Republican-led? And so we want to prepare our lists of these clubs and contacts so that when that happens, we can email them, contact them, and have their membership start calling their member of Congress and showing support for our bill. All right, the last few slides is some of these tools that CCL provides us with, marvelous tools. And the movie The Burden and the movie Tidewater are available. And so I just want to mention those, that The Burden is about 45 minutes, and it doesn't talk about climate change. It talks about the problem of oil in the military and what a burden it is for them to have to protect it, move it around, and be possibly blown up in the process, and that the number of deaths because of carting oil around is so huge. And then Tidewater is talking about sea level rise and how it's going to affect the military and diminish their abilities. These are things that veterans and the military audiences can really get on board with. And we want to encourage you to know there's tools like this out there if you want to have more of these people come to an outreach event. Here's an example of one that happened in North Carolina. 200 people attended. Half of them were veterans. And if you find a veteran that would be willing to go to these veterans groups and invite them, a veteran inviting veterans seems to be very productive. All right, and then just because I'm not talking about how to talk to conservatives, if you're feeling like, wait a minute, I'm not going to go talk to conservatives, it becomes a fight. We're trying to not start fights. We're trying to make it so we can have a conversation that's civil, just like we're asking the Climate Solutions Caucus to come together and talk. We're trying to learn to do that in our meetings even. So if you had a conservative member, new person come into your meeting, would they feel comfortable? And so you'll hear some examples of that up here in a few minutes. But at our website, there's lots of tools there. So if you go to Community to Learn under Communications, there's these talks about the moral roots of liberal conservatives, how to have a better political conversation, conservative messaging, and workshop and theory. 30 to 60 minutes or so, and you can learn ways what not to say and what to say. All right, towards the end here, I just thought I'd give you a chance that if we're looking for these keys, we found one in Mia Love. She joined the Climate Solutions Caucus early on, and I don't know if you've seen, but at the Republican National Convention, where Mr. Trump was nominated, she was one of the star speakers for the GOP. And so in Utah, she's representing the Republicans there, but she's come on the caucus. And so she spoke to our group in November, I think it was, that she came, this may have been last June. It was June, okay. Last June, she came to our celebration after our lobby day to encourage us and say how impressed she is and what she wanted to do. On the side, you'll see Jay Butera, who led the charge in Florida to start the Climate Solutions Caucus and help us empower that. And then you'll see a little bit of Edric up there because he gave an award to Mr. Lowenthal that night for being on the Climate Solutions Caucus. So this is about a minute and a half, and I want you to hear how the CCLers responded to her. We will see if this plays here.
Take the fact that people are giving us false decisions, saying that one has to come at the detriment of the other. In other words, we should reject the fact that we say that our lands have to come at the expense of energy and vice versa. But I believe that all of us, as we come together, our energy producers, our environmentalists, moms, business owners, Americans coming together to say we have a responsibility to our children. People like Mia have been working really hard to come to my office, even though she cannot vote, has come to work and tell us what we need to be doing and telling us to take responsibility for her. And the fact that she's going to be the one that is going to be inheriting this wonderful land that we live on. So these are the things that I know for a fact. And I want you to know that I, as a member of Congress, as an American, as a Republican, think it is our responsibility to work across the aisle together to get rid of partisan politics and do what's right for the American people.
And it needs to be an issue that both sides of the political spectrum work on. And so thank you for all your efforts, that we can celebrate this every day. This brings me hope that we are moving, and we now have 70 members of the Climate Solutions Caucus, and I encourage you to use that graphic often. Another thing you'll see on my table over here is the Climate Leadership Council producing their Republican method for putting a price on carbon. It's not exactly like ours, but it's pretty close. And so if you want a copy of that, I have a few more over there. And when we went to the GOP convention, we summarized it onto a handout, and you can have one of those at the table over there if you like. And I chose to put on the top of the handout the Conservative Caucus, and then of Citizens Climate Lobby. And so it's a way that they would stay engaged and know that we're friend, we're not foe, and we make ways of connection that make it easier for them to come out of the corner that they've backed themselves into. We backed ourselves into. All right. Where we're headed now is that you get a chance to be put in. So Jenny Akey, a Conservative Caucus member in the back, and I have a clipboard here. And if you want to sign up to be on the Conservative Caucus or a friend of the caucus, we'd like your information. You've seen these sign-up sheets before. They're multi-use. And so we're going to use them now. And so Jenny, you started on that side. I'll start it over here. All right. So we'll start that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a few more comments by me, and then we're going to hear some testimonials of people that have done this, and then we'll be done. I'm encouraged that as we focus on going to June, there's some strategic things we can do to get ready for our lobby day to be even more effective. And one is that we'd have a Conservative Caucus or a Conservative member, constituent CCLer from every state. So when they go to their senators and their Republican offices, they can say, I'm from Kansas, I'm in CCL, and I'm conservative. And so we've targeted where we already are, and we're celebrating the 20 or so states that we have covered, but there's about 30 states that we don't have covered, that we don't have a Conservative Caucus member or a conservative coming to our DC conference from that state. And so that map is available, but I encourage you to be thinking, where are your family, where are your friends across the country that might relate to this type of message, that a conservative message on a solution to drawing down the risk of climate risk. And they've put their money where their mouth is. We now have scholarships for those conservatives to come to DC. So be thinking of that there's going to be available. We'll have scholarships for diversity also. And so, but even politically, we're diversifying and putting some money there. So you can tell them that they might even get a scholarship to come and help defray their costs to come to DC. Because it's so important. I know when I go into a member of Congress's office that's Republican, if it's all Democrats, they aren't as welcome. But when I say I'm Craig Preston, I'm from Orange County, and I'm a Republican, and I believe in action on climate change, they calm down a little bit. So that's what we're trying to build. All right, I'm going to invite 4 people up here to join me. They know who they are, Larry and Judy and Penelope and Norm. Okay, here they come. All right, I will introduce them first, then they're going to go for it. And can somebody give me one of the microphones there? 10 minutes. We're going to hand them a microphone, and you can give it to Larry here. 2 of these members lean right, and 2 of them, I don't care if they lean right or left. They're group leaders, though, and they are going to introduce kind of how they made it so that their chapter was a little friendlier. And first we're going to hear from Larry, though, of how he found CCL to be friendly and why, as a right-leaning person, he found his way into CCL and why he stays. So we'll hear from Larry. We'll hear from Judy, from the group leader. Penelope is group leader for Inland Valley. They're from North San Diego County. And then Penelope and Norm are in the Inland Valley area. And Penelope Mann is the group leader, and Norm King has recently found us, or we found him. And I'm going to have him speak for a few minutes too about his perspective on being a conservative in CCL. So here we go. You get about 1 to 2 minutes each. Try to keep it more towards 1. So Larry, go for it.
All right. So I found CCL, but what brought me in was the very welcoming approach that Judy gave. She was giving a talk as part of an interfaith presentation on climate. And afterwards, I walked up to her and said, well, I'm a Republican Jewish scientist. And she said, we need you! Woo! And that made me feel welcome. And the other thing that I really appreciate about CCL is just the educational opportunities. I'm trying to put together a talk that I want to give to conservative audiences, and all the education and encouragement that I'm getting has really made me feel that I'm making progress on that. So that's what keeps me here, and the welcoming that I feel. So that's hopefully a minute.
Okay, well, Larry really said it, and from there I just kept inviting him. I invited him to our meeting, and he came, and I was really excited. And then he told me he wanted to make a presentation, but he was having trouble getting it done, so I kept inviting him to finish it. And then I invited him to give his presentation to our group so he could practice it, and he did that twice, and we gave him a lot of feedback. And then I invited him to go to the GOP convention that I recommend highly to anyone who has the slightest bit interest in that, and we went together, and it was a really great experience. And then we had our debut last week. The American Public Works Association has a monthly meeting, and he and I gave a presentation together. I introduced it, and then he talked about why, as a Republican, climate change is important to him. And then I talked a little bit more, and it was a great success. And I just want to say, I heard once on a group leader call, a Republican group leader talk about how CCL had lost a lot of Republicans because the lack of feeling welcome and the lack of sort of the tribalism. And that really made an impression on me. So I tell my group a lot that we are there to welcome everyone, and it's not a Trump bashing event.
Well, Norm King and I are just getting started, but Norm's a childhood friend of my husband's, and they both grew up in conservative Bakersfield in the 1950s. And at a Bakersfield reunion about 3 years ago, Norm and I had a conversation about CCL and carbon fee and dividend, and he's in global warming, and he's a former city manager of Claremont and of Palm Springs, so he knows budgets and systems and government planning. So recently we reconnected in Palm Springs, and I was talking about CCL again, and lo and behold, he had written an article lamenting the loss of carbon fee and dividend legislation in the state of Washington. So we talked some more, and I asked him point blank, and he said, well, I'm still registered as a Republican. So fully aware of the Conservative Caucus, I said, what are you doing February 17th and 18th? And he looked at his calendar, and he was free, and I said, Norm, you would find a huge welcome at Citizens Climate Lobby, and you might like us too. And so, so I contacted Craig, and Craig is very well organized, got right to Norm, and so Norm is here, and I'm very proud to be part of CCL that welcomes in this way, and I'm very proud to introduce Norm King to CCL.
Well, thank you, Penny, and I assure you all I felt very welcome here. Craig, if I could, I'll take about 3 minutes, but cut me off if I go too long.
3 minutes, good.
What I'd like to do is just sort of talk about how I like to talk to my fellow fiscal conservatives about why a revenue-neutral carbon fee is based on conservative principles. Personal accountability. How more conservative would you want to start with? That is, a carbon fee is a way to hold us individually accountable for costs we impose on others. It's a user fee. It's an atmospheric using up fee. It's no different than an electric bill, a water bill. And I think if we think of it, particularly when we talk to people like Craig and I, we should like user fees a lot more than we like taxes. And that's the whole point, in my opinion, about a carbon fee. It is a user fee because it directly relates my indiscretions of carbon use to how I have to pay for it. And I would argue, too, with a fellow conservative that where a user fee can be imposed where there's an honest nexus between use and cost, it's far preferable to taxation. Use price to achieve a public good, another pretty good basic conservative principle. Using price via user fee will always be more equitable and efficient, and I stress both of those E words, than other governmental tools, such as spending money, regulating, bribing people. Some people call it subsidies. I call it bribing people to do the right things. A carbon fee results in a progressive cost structure because the more affluent consume a proportionally greater portion of the carbon that we consume. And that's, of course, potentially more appealing on the liberal side, but I think most conservatives I deal with are concerned about equity too. And here's the example of the carbon fee is it serves both equity and efficiency. It spurs competition and innovation. A carbon fee spurs innovation and provides incentives to the market to compete to reduce greenhouse gas at the least cost in contrast to traditional policies which enable politicians to choose winners and losers and which inevitably result in more costly non-solutions or to the creation of such schemes as cap and trade, which become a piggy bank to fund programs which are only vaguely related to reducing carbon emissions. The goal is to spend the least amount of money per ton of carbon emissions, the reduction, the least amount of money to reduce a carbon ton. If that became our goal across the board, then we could spend even the same amount of money as we are now, but achieve far more. Accounting for life cycle emissions, and this is pretty critical. A carbon fee will force producers and users to account for life cycle emissions rather than complying with regulations such as end-use regulations, such as mileage standards, which encourage producers to increase carbon at the front end of the production process in order to obtain lower emissions during the end use, such as tailpipe. And this part of our problem is we focus on only the output so often, not realizing that to get there, we're incentivizing producers often to use more carbon on the front end to achieve on the back end. A carbon fee frees us from that possibility. And I'm getting to the end here. Transparency in government, another key conservative principle, I believe. A carbon fee is more transparent than carbon reduction regulations or bribery programs. The cost is explicit. It may be wrong. Maybe we start low. Maybe we go higher. Probably should. But at least it's explicit, as opposed to this, I would call mess, lengthy, well, what's the right word? As opposed to hundreds of regulations and programs and feel-good ideas that no one is tallying up in terms of what they really cost per ton. And if we did, of course, we probably wouldn't do many of them. But the point is a carbon fee helps us avoid that whole issue. It's explicit and it's transparent. And finally, it's not a net cost to the economy. A revenue-neutral carbon fee, unlike existing green policies and subsidies, does not impose a deadweight cost on the economy. It uses the pricing structure in the best possible way to achieve a desirable public good, which of course is carbon reduction. So if all else fails, and sometimes it does, and I was talking to the Indian Wells Rotary Club, maybe this was a couple of years ago, and I knew my audience, and I knew that probably they did not necessarily believe in, all of them believe in climate change. So as I say, if I fail in other ways, the bottom line is, to this type of people, is even if you don't agree that climate change is an issue, we're spending lots of money now, and a carbon fee is at least the cheaper way to do something you don't want to do.
All right. Well, I wanted you to hear from me, but I wanted you to have a taste of people that have applied this and gone out and had some success. Please, next year, think of how many people you will bring that will be on both sides of the political spectrum so we can continue to build CCL in a bipartisan way. And I'm going to now turn it over. We were going to have a Q&A, but we're going to move on because we got stuff to get to that is exciting. So feel free to come to the table, sign the clipboards, and I'll be around.